Well, welcome everybody to our session about B Corps and benefit corporations. This is part of the small business management series that I've been organizing in my role at UCSD Extension for the past couple of years. Just want to walk real quick through the agenda, and then I'll turn things over to our speaker. So just want to let everybody know that we are recording this session. So audio and video has been disabled for participants, just so we can make sure everything goes smoothly. We are going to be letting people submit their questions via chat. And then when we get near the end, I will let Patrick know what your questions are, and he can respond to those. And then Patrick also has a few little polls that we'll be running as we go through this, so you'll have a chance to engage that way as well. We will post this session, the recording of it, on our Extension's YouTube channel, and I'll also have a link to it on the Small Business Management page, which I'll show you a link to that in a minute. Probably take a couple days at least for that video to get posted. So our speaker today is Patrick Klingborg, an attorney with Pillsbury Winthrop here in San Diego. So once I give my overview of Extension, he'll take over from here. So if you're not familiar with UCSD Extension, we are the continuing education and professional development arm of the university. Typically, you think of Extension as a place for weekend, evening type courses where you can take, an individual course or get certificates to up your skill set. There's more to it than that, but the Extension is kind of like a university within the university, and you can see from those numbers on the slide that we do have quite a few people enrolled in our courses. For this series, particularly when I've been doing it in person, I have two partners, which are some co-working spaces in downtown San Diego, Downtown Works and Cross Campus. So always really appreciative for their support, and look forward to hopefully working with them for the in-person sessions at some point in the future. Just FYI, as far as future topics in the series that are coming up, these are all going to be done via webinar, so you can see the list there. Those are available for you to sign up if you haven't done so already. And also, just as of about an hour ago, some colleagues at Extension have posted a series of 6 webinars related to leadership and management issues, and you can see the one that's coming up right there. I'll put a link to that in the chat here in a second. So for more information about the Small Business Management Series, you can go here, that URL. Again, I'll put that in chat here in a second. And then I do try to source all of these topics from the community. So if you have any ideas that you want to feed to me, here's my email address. Feel free to reach out. And since Extension has over 4,000 different courses and over 1,000 different instructors, there's a pretty good chance that I can find a subject matter expert like Patrick, who can run with a given topic and provide a lot of useful practical information for you. All right, so with that, I am going to turn things over to Patrick. He can take over from here, and I will let you go with it, Patrick.
Cool. Thanks, Nathan. So my name is Patrick Klingborg. I'm an attorney with Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman. We're a large law firm. We've got about 700 lawyers. We're 150 years old. I work with a lot of startup companies and businesses and all kinds of commercial transactions. I enjoy working with those kinds of companies because I think they're always solving some sort of exciting challenge or tackling some sort of problem in an innovative way. And that's led me to do things like speak at San Diego Startup Week and try to get involved in the community to the extent that I can. I guess before I really jump into it, I'd just like to say that I would like to give a plug for UCSD Extension. I was a former employee of UCSD Extension many years ago and have taken classes there, and they really do a great job with everything. And this day and age, I think some people, given the kind of slowdown we've been having, it's either given them a moment to contemplate, well, maybe I want to take my career in a different direction because they have to, or maybe just the slowdown has given them that pause to consider that kind of thing. And whether you're doing that or you're just deciding I want to strengthen my skills in my current field, I think UCC extension is a really great way to go. So one of the things I always get asked when I do these talks in the community is, what about B Corps? What about benefit corporations? And even though they are not prevalent in the real world as much as I think some people believe, I decided, you know what, there are so many questions about this, I think it would help to do an overview of them. So here we are. Okay, so before I jump into the substance, I think it would help to get a little background as to what stage the audience is in, and that may help me to tailor this a little bit better to who's on the line. So I think that either you could type in the chat or there might be a poll where you can provide a response here. Here we go. And I'm just trying to get a sense for, you know, are you advanced, maybe not so, doesn't really matter to me. It looks like most people are, okay, so maybe like about to start a company, somewhere in there. Nobody with a benefit corporation or B Corp already. Okay, so that's pretty much about what I expected. So that's very helpful. Okay, I wouldn't be worth my salt as an attorney if I didn't have some fine print shoved in somewhere. So let's just go ahead and get that right out of the way. Love to work with any and all of you, and you know, perhaps become your attorney someday. But just to be clear, although I very much appreciate you attending this presentation, that does not make me automatically your lawyer. I know most people already know that, but I felt like it's worth saying anyway. I think thing number 0, before we even get into thing number 1 to know about benefit corporations and B Corps, is that they are not, in fact, the same thing. And I think that's a very easy misconception to make, because the B seems like it would stand for benefit, and the word corps seems like it would stand for corporations. So aren't those the same thing? But it's kind of more of your classic Venn diagram situation where there are differences between them. They are indeed distinct things, but there is a lot of overlap, and a lot of companies out there end up becoming both. But just to get that out of the way from the beginning, they are indeed different. And I think that's the number one thing that people don't even realize when they start talking about these things. So an example of something that's a benefit corporation but not a B Corp would be Method soap. I think I've seen this in stores like Target or other similar stores. They usually have these kind of light, translucent, pastel colored for their products. And at least as they started out, they were committed to making a green soap. So something without harmful chemicals and that sort of thing, which I think most people probably on this presentation, you know, okay, benefit corporation, B Corp, I think those things are supposed to be good for the environment or society. And that's accurate. That generally is the idea. And we'll kind of get more into the specifics of it soon. An example of something that falls into the other category, B Corp, but not benefit corporation, would be Etsy. So I'm sure you've probably heard of Etsy. This is more or less an online marketplace for consumer goods. It could be anything like, you know, custom family t-shirts for your Disneyland trip, to necklaces, to other sorts of things. There is a little asterisk next to Etsy because I'll get into that a little bit later, but I wanted to put that there to remind you that we did talk about Etsy as a B Corp at the beginning of the presentation. And then in the middle is Patagonia. So they're both a benefit corporation and a B Corp. Patagonia is, of course, a maker of kind of outdoor apparel and equipment, like hiking gear, camping gear, that kind of thing. Patagonia, in my opinion, is probably one of the biggest kind of poster childs for benefit corporations or B Corps. They, in fact, were one of the first benefit corporations formed under California laws. So I think in California, starting 2012, you could become a benefit corporation, and their legal documentation is dated as of January 1, 2012. So they had it all planned in advance because they wanted to be, one of the first, because they were so committed to this idea. So briefly, I think it helps to have an understanding of a general corporate structure. I know this sounds a little bit boring, but just bear with me, because if you understand this, then you can truly grasp the significance and the importance of why are benefit corporations and B Corps so special. But this is kind of the foundation that you need to have in hand. And some of you may already know this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But basically the way a corporation is structured is you've got these three different kind of constituencies. You've got your shareholders, you've got your board of directors, you've got your officers. There's different forms of this diagram. I kind of like this one because it's got the board of directors at the top. And that's because they are in charge, right? They control what's going on. Your shareholders, of course, they elect the board of directors. So if you're running your corporation correctly, you should have an annual meeting, and the shareholders decide who they want to be the directors. The directors are generally responsible for what's happening in the corporation. And then they elect the officers to implement those things. So I think a way to help make sure that this is understood is an analogy. And the one I like to use is kind of like democracy. So in this analogy, the shareholders, those are like me and you, the citizens who vote. And who do we vote for? Well, we vote for a representative. That could be like a city council person. That could be someone in Congress. It could be someone on the county level. And those persons who we vote for, those are kind of like the board of directors in this example, right? You kind of vote for, you say, okay, I'm going to vote for this person for San Diego mayor. Whoever is elected, I kind of have to live with them for the next year or however long it is until the next election. And I'm just going to trust that they're going to be in charge and they're going to do the right thing. And kind of in between those elections, hopefully they do the right thing. Hopefully they do what I want, because absent special circumstances, it's hard to change them midterm, so to speak. But then keep in mind the politicians that you actually elect, right? Like the mayor you actually elect, that person probably isn't writing all of the laws that are proposed under them themselves, right? They're probably not researching every single thing themselves. They have aides or other people in their office, their chief of staff who can help them. And those aides and chief of staff people, those are kind of like the officers in this example. So it's kind of this a little bit amorphous structure if you're not familiar with it, of these three different groups of people, but just kind of think about it as these checks and balances, right? Different people have a little bit different role. They kind of overlap. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to remember is that the board of directors are in charge. They are running the show. They are making all the decisions on behalf of any corporation or company. That's a really big responsibility, right? There's a few people. It could be, in a small company, it could be one person. And if you are a one-person company, you may be the sole shareholder, you may be the sole director, and you may be, the only officer. And you may be, because you have to have three officers, so you might be the president, the secretary, and the CFO. But as the company gets bigger, it makes sense to have different people who are shareholders, maybe some overlap with the board of directors, and then different people who are officers. It's all about these checks and balances to make sure every constituency is recognized. But again, the board of directors is on top, and they've got a very important role because they're in charge. And the law has developed this concept that shows up in other places, but it's called fiduciary duty. So this is really key to why we have benefit corporations. Basically, a fiduciary duty says that as directors, they must always be acting in the best interest of the company and the stockholders, right? So that may be a little bit different than what's in best interest of the director personally. There can be situations where it makes sense for them to do one thing because it's better for them. They might get more money, but it's better for the company as a whole to do something else. And what do you do in that situation? Well, the director always has to act in the interest of the stockholders in the company. Kind of the enforcement mechanism, the stick that comes along with that is if the shareholders decide, what, I don't think this director has been making the best decisions for us. I don't think that they're doing a good job. you can sue as a shareholder, a director, for breach of their fiduciary duty and say they weren't acting in the best interests of me. They were acting in the best interests of them. And that's really powerful because you could be somebody who, maybe you only own 5% of the shares in a company. So that's not enough really to, it's not a majority. So you can't force through any decisions you want. But even though you only have 5%, you can get some sort of recourse in the form of a lawsuit for a breach of fiduciary duty. And that's a very powerful right. So this is really key to understanding kind of the corporate landscape as it existed before benefit corporations and how benefit corporations changed it. So just to give you a quick example, because I think it can be a little difficult to think of a situation where, the director's personal interest is one way versus the corporation's interest is another way, is a quick case. This is from 1939. This is called Guth v. Loft. Loft is a candy company. So they make candies, sodas, all kinds of sweets. I kind of think of it as, like a Willy Wonka storefront, just because, that movie depicted it during that time frame. And they were doing pretty okay, right? They weren't the market leader, but they definitely weren't lagging either. So they were kind of plugging along. Guth was the president of Loft. So he was, more or less the person running the show, making the decisions on behalf of what the company was going to buy, what the company was going to sell, what the company's strategy was going to be, how they would market, how they would advertise. That's the type of thing that an officer or a director does. So the opportunity came up, and I believe this was from a bankruptcy, to buy the secret formula and the trademark to Pepsi. And that's, I wasn't alive in the 1930s, so I don't know exactly how popular Pepsi was, but it was, still relatively popular. Unfortunately, they had a situation where they had to sell off their assets, and the Pepsi formula and soda was one that, Loft would compete with. They were in the same market. So this opportunity to potentially purchase, the name brand Pepsi and run it through the Loft company and have this secret formula that could be very advantageous to someone like Loft, who was kind of in that same space, in that same industry. So Guth, as a man in the candy and sweets industry, naturally heard about this. The news spread. And I think, one option would be for Guth to say, okay, I'm going to have Loft execute a contract and purchase the Pepsi formula and purchase the Pepsi trademark. And now Loft will own those things. But Guth kind of thought, well, I've got some other ideas. I'm president of Loft, but I also have this other company called the Grace Company. So another thing I could do is maybe I have the Grace Company purchase the Pepsi trademark and the Pepsi formula instead of doing it with Loft. And then I could have, because again, Guth is kind of more or less controlling both of these companies, I could have the Grace Company kind of license or sell or let Loft use the Pepsi trademark and let it use the Pepsi secret formula. In exchange, Loft would pay Grace, and indirectly, Guth would receive some of that compensation via salary or bonus or however he got compensated through the Grace Company. So that is indeed what Guth did. He had the Grace Company purchase it and he licensed it back to Loft. Now, when the Loft shareholders found out about this, they sued him for breach of fiduciary duty because they said, wait a minute, it would have been way better for us if you had Loft buy Pepsi, because then we would have just gotten it and we could have kept all the profit arising out of Pepsi. Instead, you made Loft pay extra for it and you got paid both ways, right? You got paid because Loft was selling Pepsi, albeit at a high price because they had to license it from the Grace Company. And then you also got paid through the Grace Company. So in this breach of fiduciary duty suit, given that you're all experts on breach of fiduciary duty now, who do you think won, Guth or Loft? And I think that we have a poll. Okay, we have a couple votes for Loft. Anyone else? No one for Guth? Poor Guth. You're just trying to be creative. Okay, well, everyone said Loft, and you're right. Loft won. Guth totally breaches fiduciary duty. And that, I think, is a classic example where, you know, in theory, it doesn't sound like, well, wait, why would the director ever act in a way that's not consistent with what the stockholder wants? Well, that's an example of a situation. Everyone said Loft. Good job. You're great students. Yeah. And again, it kind of came down to the fact that as a person in charge, he was not putting the interests of the stockholders first because they did not realize as much money, as much profit doing it the way he did it. If Loft bought the company directly, they would have gotten more profit. So now let's tweak this a little bit to show you the power of benefit corporations. So this is where it gets really interesting. Ben & Jerry's. This is a company I think most people have heard of. They kind of build themselves as this all natural ice cream, right? I think they use milk from cows that aren't treated with additional hormones. For a long time, they gave, I think, 7% of pre-tax profits to charitable causes. What else? They'll also tweak the name of certain flavors to promote a certain cause. So like they took one of their apple pie flavor, and for, I don't know, a couple months, they said, you know, all profits arising from this, or a portion of the profits will go in support of same-sex marriages. And they had another one in support of climate change. So they, I think, fit the profile of what you would think of as a benefit corporation or a B Corp, because they were concerned with things, you know, other than just money. They wanted to give back. They wanted to do good. They wanted to create a public benefit. So there came a time in Ben & Jerry's corporate life when they had two offers to buy them. They had one from Dreyer's, right? Dreyer's is another ice cream company. They don't hold themselves out to have that kind of hippie vibe or that all natural vibe. But they are at their core an ice cream company. That's what they do. And then they had another offer from a company called Unilever. So you may have seen this logo before. It's on a ton of stuff. There's probably something in your bathroom with this logo. They own all sorts of cosmetics, beauty supplies, all sorts of food. They own like Lipton tea. They own Ragu spaghetti sauce. They, I think at one point, were the third largest company in the world for consumer products generally. And they're just all over the map, right? They're not confined to ice cream at all. So the thing here was the Unilever offer to buy Ben & Jerry's was a little bit higher than the Dreyer's offer, but Ben & Jerry's, and I am simplifying this a little bit for the purposes of illustration instead of getting into the nitty gritty. But I think the way to think about it is that the Dreyer offer was a little bit lower than the Unilever offer, but the Ben & Jerry's guys, who were still Ben and Jerry, they were still running the company. They said, well, we kind of want to go with Dreyer's offer because they're an ice cream company, right? They're not this huge multinational conglomerate that is, we're just another kind of feather in their cap. We're just part of their portfolio. And, you know, the Dreyer offers, it's good. It's just a little bit less, but who cares? We don't need the extra money. You know, let's go with Dreyer's. So I think we have one more poll. Who do you think they went with? Do you think they sold to Dreyer's, or do you think they sold to Unilever? Okay. More for Unilever, a couple for Dreyer's. Anyone else? So the answer is they went to Unilever. And the reason why is they felt that if they did not go with Unilever, even though they didn't really want to, that they were going to be sued for breaching the fiduciary duty. Why? Because they were not maximizing shareholder profit if they went to Dreyer's. In other words, it was all about the money and only about the money. And they felt like if they didn't do what the money said regardless of anything else, regardless of the fact that dryers actually kind of fit with their culture, shared the same desire to continue some of their environmental and society benefits and impacts. They felt like, it's not going to matter because it only takes someone with maybe 5% of our company to say, well, I should have gotten 3% more on my stock and I didn't, so I'm going to sue you. And Ben and Jerry thought, they might win. The law is a little fuzzy in this area, but it was enough of a concern that they decided, we feel like our hands are tied. We have to go to Unilever. So that kind of leads us to thing to know number one about benefit corporations. And that is that fiduciary duty has changed. So this is huge. This is so different than any other entity type. Benefit corporation is actually a distinct type of corporate entity. So you can form as a corporation, right? You can form as an LLC. Well, as of about 10 years ago, you can now form as a benefit corporation, which is this new entity that never existed before. And the big deal with this, and that's why I have this key takeaway sticker here, is directors are allowed to consider all of this stuff. They can consider shareholders. And in a normal entity, that's pretty much all you have to do is just consider, did the shareholders get the most amount of money, period. And that's why there's this kind of stereotype of, oh, you're just some evil corporation. Well, in a way, the law is kind of set up like that. That is really all they're supposed to care about is profit. But with a benefit corporation, directors are not only allowed, but they're actually mandated to consider other things like workers. Are you treating them fairly? Customers, are you doing things in a manner where you're giving them quality products and you're treating them with respect? Community, what about sourcing locally? Things like that. Environment, are your practices sustainable? You don't just have to consider the short-term profit. You can also consider, in the long run, maybe this decision doesn't give us as much money right now, but in the long run it might. So you're allowed to consider that. And then of course the corporation, whatever the stated public benefit is, which is something that you indeed put in writing. So let's switch this to another example, and you may be familiar with this one. So we had Whole Foods, which provides kind of like organic and locally sourced produce. It's a grocery store, but they kind of really built their reputation on the quality of the produce that they had. And then you had Amazon, which of course is, one of the biggest companies that has ever existed. So did Whole Foods buy Amazon or did Amazon buy Whole Foods? We've got a poll for this. A lot of people on Amazon bought Whole Foods. Anyone for the other way around? No, yeah, and of course you're all right. So the interesting thing here about this is, as you might imagine, Whole Foods culture, organic, sustainable, environmentally conscious, that doesn't really easily square with Amazon, at least not as we think it, right? There's all sorts of press about Amazon and the way their workers are treated. Jeff Bezos is kind of in the crosshairs a lot for this, that, and the other thing. And so you might kind of think, I know I did when this was announced, was like, Amazon's buying Whole Foods? That doesn't even make any sense to me. Well, the reason why is because it's kind of like the Unilever idea, right? Amazon's just kind of diversifying their portfolio. They don't necessarily have a passion for organic produce, but they felt like, we might be able to squeeze a few extra bucks out of this company. And so we're going to buy it for that reason. So the interesting thing is the CEO of Whole Foods after the purchase, he was quoted saying, "I wish we had been a benefit corporation, because if we had, we could have rejected the sale and say, no, we don't want to take this very good price for us," because that's what it was. Amazon, whenever you buy a company, you kind of pay a little bit of a premium, because then they can't really say no to it. Because if they do say no to it, then what happens? The shareholders sue for breach of fiduciary duty. So the CEO of Whole Foods felt like, I had to say yes to this offer, even though I didn't want to be bought by Amazon. This didn't make sense to me at all. But if I didn't, because it was such a good price, it was the best price that anyone had for us, then I would have been sued. So again, if you had a benefit corporation, then there's probably an argument that, well, for these other things, these other considerations that you can make, it doesn't make sense to sell to Amazon. If you're only considering the shareholders up top and only considering their profit, then it's kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of black and white. But if you're considering these other things, it's a different conversation. So things to know, number 2, your articles of incorporation or your certificate of incorporation, which is kind of the document you file with wherever state you form, it actually will say your benefits. So you actually have to decide, well, what is my benefit and what is it going to be? Here's an example of Patagonia's. They get really far into the detail. That language in section 2A there at the top, that's kind of what you expect to see in this type of document for a normal corporation. It's very vague. It just says, we'll do anything that's lawful. But in a benefit corporation, that changes it. You actually decide, okay, this is our benefit. This is what we are going to do. Patagonia got very detailed with theirs. It's not necessary to get quite that in detail, but this is just an example. And I think it's important to know this because you kind of have to, it's almost like putting your money where your mouth is a little bit. It's one thing to put on your company website, we believe in the environment, right? But it's another thing to have in like a legally significant document that's publicly available to anyone that this exactly is what our benefit is, because people can hold you accountable, and that's kind of the idea.
Hey, Patrick, just real quick, we're at the 12:33 mark, so just wanted to let you know. And then also remind everybody, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then when we get to the Q&A period, we'll go over those.
Thank you, Nathan. So that kind of leads us to number 3, which is, how you have to say, hey, here is my public benefit. And these can be a variety of things. It can be, something kind of in almost the charitable range. It could be environment. It could be, pertaining to, economic issues. It's really a wide variety of what a benefit can be. But the law allows this thing called a benefit corporation, or benefit enforcement proceeding, which means, how shareholders can sue you for breach of fiduciary duty? Well, kind of as a related note for benefit corporations only, they can also say, hey, I don't think that you're properly pursuing our benefit. I know you said our mission was to save the trees, but all your efforts have been to save the oceans. I mean, that's fine and all, but I invested my money. I bought the stock to save some trees, not to save the ocean. You're doing the wrong thing. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. There hasn't been a ton of lawsuits over this, so we don't really know how big of an issue or risk this is. But that is just something to be aware of. It's kind of like, with this great power, the power to consider things other than just profit, there's this great responsibility, which is you have to actually do that thing that you said you're going to do.
You couldn't real quick go back to the Patagonia breakdown real quick?
Oh, right here, yeah.
Yeah, some people wanted to look at that a little bit more.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so, and this is a document that you can look up at the Secretary of State's website. Let me see if I can move this.
And then just remind everybody what's underneath that, the thing to know, number 2.
Oh, yes. So yeah, you just have to state that it is a benefit corporation, and usually you have to state some kind of benefit, what is it? So it's kind of like that old saying, like, well, are you giving yourself enough rope to hang yourself with, right? It's like, at first it seems like, oh, great, I'll state my benefit. This is great. And I think in some ways it can be, because I think for some consumers and investors and strategic partners, they're like, wow, these people are really committed. Again, this isn't just some, stray Instagram post about how they love whatever it may be, right? Clean air. They're actually like putting in their documents that they will commit themselves to pursuing clean air. So again, in some ways that can be good, but we've got this benefit enforcement proceeding that could make it a little more difficult. And then at the end, Nathan, maybe you can help me remember, I can talk about converting a Delaware C Corp into a benefit corp. I see that question in the chat, as well as which state is best. Short answer would probably be Delaware would be the best one. Okay, so we talked about benefit enforcement proceedings. Number 4, this is a pretty important one too. You have to file a report as a benefit corporation. And basically the report says, Okay, shareholders, you know how you joined this benefit corporation because we wanted to create a public benefit of promoting clean air? Well, here's how we did over the last year. Here are our metrics that we decided to use for evaluating whether we did a good job of promoting that or not. Here's how we scored. In most states, you have to use a third-party standard, meaning you can't say, well, I think as long as I went to one fundraiser for clean air a year, that's probably good, right? I mean, that would be easy because then you could just kind of write your own rules. And you can kind of select your own rules, but you have to select a set of rules that's been developed by someone else that's not you. Delaware on a lot of these requirements is a lot more lax. So that's why I've said I think Delaware is probably the best one. There are just fewer requirements. So you're less likely to trip up some rule or do something wrong inadvertently. In California and in most states, you have to deliver this report every year. In Delaware, again, it's a little more lax. It's every other year. So again, it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for the founders, the people who created the company. And then in most states, it has to be available publicly. In Delaware, you only have to provide it to the stockholders. So again, makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to put it all there out in the open, right? I mean, I think probably kind of like the nightmare scenario is, well, what if you did a really bad job pursuing or promoting your benefit? Now you have to put that on the public and say, yeah, we didn't really do a good job, right? No company wants to do that. I mean, that's public relations. The whole point is to always try and make yourself look as good as you possibly can. So it's a little bit counter to that. But the flip side to it is, well, look, you say you want to pursue something and you want this very unique, very special protection for your directors to pursue things other than profit. Well, then, you need to be held accountable. And the way we do that is you need to tell us every year how you did. So I think this is an interesting and kind of a cool concept, but, it is an additional obligation. So, food for thought. And then last thing to know about benefit corporations before I jump quickly into B Corps, because I know we are getting close on time, is that you do have additional rights created for your shareholders in a benefit corporation. So, for example, if you're converting from a regular corporation to a benefit corporation or back, you need extra people to approve. Usually the law says you only need a majority of the ownership interest to say, yes, we can do it, but you need a super majority, so 2/3. And then there's also this thing called appraisal or dissenters' rights, meaning if there's a merger into a benefit corporation or out of a benefit corporation or some sort of sale of your benefit corporation's assets, the people who don't want to go for it, maybe they only own 5%, they can say, you know what, I don't want to vote in favor of this transaction. I don't think it's a good deal. So instead, you need to pay me out cash immediately for my shares. And that's a powerful right because usually, in a private company, you don't have the right to just get your money back whenever you want. It's an investment. And the company may also not have that cash sitting around, right? Their assets may be illiquid. So again, there's some extra kind of responsibility with this power of being a benefit corporation and not having to be beholden to profit above all else, which is really what most entities have to do. So now, B Corps. First thing to know, besides that a B Corp is not the same as a benefit corporation, is that a B Corp is not a legal entity, right? Like I said, there's S Corps, there's C Corps, there's LLCs, there's benefit corporations. There's not really such a thing as a legal B Corp. A B Corp is really just like this label. And you don't even have to be a corporation. You could actually be an LLC and be a B Corp, which I think is very confusing because when you hear the word corp, you think corporation. There is this nonprofit entity called B Labs. And to put it kind of frankly, they've said, we are the decider. If you do certain things, which we'll talk about, you can be called a certified B corporation. And we let you use this fancy logo that you see here, which I think in some ways is kind of cool, right? If you see it on the back of a drink or some other product, you may think, oh, okay, look, this kind of third party that's independent has evaluated this company and determined, yeah, they actually do evidence a commitment to a particular benefit. They're not just saying they're for the environment. They're not just saying they're for some sort of a public good. They're actually doing it. And again, it's not the company saying that. If they're using the B Corp logo, it's B Labs who said it. It's a different company altogether that kind of audited them. And that audit is called this B impact assessment. So that's this kind of every 3 years, you have to fill out this big long survey, essentially. And based on your answers, they will determine whether or not you are allowed to call yourself a B Corp or not, and whether you can use that logo or not. So here's like a couple of quick examples. I'll probably flip through them quickly because I know time is getting a little bit tight. But, you know, again, recall the slide that said all the different things that you can consider in discharging your fiduciary duty, right? So like one of them was like the employees. So here's a question about employees. You know, do they get paid time off for community service? Here's another one. You know, when it comes to your suppliers, how do you evaluate them with respect to environmental factors? Do you do that at all? Do you pay your people market wages? Do you allow your workers to pursue continuing education opportunities like UCC extension classes, for example? Do you allow that? Do you make that possible? Have you worked with your landlord to put in, you know, environmentally friendly features into your building? Do you use renewable energy? Have you tried to work with the people who govern your industry to say, you know, this is what everyone in our industry should be doing from a social and environmental aspect? Do you do those things? And is your management evaluated at all based on, you know, what they do in this realm? So that these are just a sample, but I think this kind of gives you a flavor for the kind of things that you'll go through. Next thing to know is you have to pay B Lab money to certify you, which at first I think seems a little odd, but if you look at the fee schedule, in my opinion, it's not that bad. I think when you're an earlier stage company, you know, that $1,000, that might hurt. But I think as the revenue goes up, I mean, if you look at a company with $1 million in sales, they're paying $1,400 to get certified. I mean, that's not going to be an issue for them. But that is something that I think, you know, you should know, you know, as opposed to a benefit corporation, you don't really have to pay any sort of extra fee. I mean, there are annual filings you have to make for any kind of company, whether it's an LLC, S corporation, C corporation. You usually have to file some sort of annual tax report or a statement of information, and maybe it's, you know, $100 to do that. It can depend, but there's no like extra certification fee like there is here. Thing to know number 4, the legal requirements. So this is where it also gets pretty interesting. So to be a B Corp, you actually have to eventually convert to a benefit corporation. And you can have some additional time to do that. If you're formed in a state that does not have, because not all states have benefit corporations. I think there's 37 US states that have it. So if you're in a state that my state just doesn't have this, doesn't make it available for me, then B Corp says, okay, well, basically you need to amend your governing documents. This would be like your articles of incorporation or bylaws to kind of put in these extra things that the directors consider and still be okay that they're not breaching their fiduciary duty. You know, I would kind of caution maybe a little bit of being careful with that, because in a way they're arguably saying, yeah, your state doesn't recognize B corporations, but just kind of do it anyway. Just write it in anyway. And I think that could be tricky, because if there is some sort of lawsuit over, you know, were your directors allowed to consider their employees when they rejected this sale? You know, that state doesn't really have laws allowing that, but you kind of just wrote it in yourself. And, you know, what you write in an agreement will not trump whatever the law in your state says. So that can be a little tricky. If you're in a state that developed benefit corporation, that allows benefit corporations, but maybe you formed without being one, maybe you just formed as a regular C Corp, they say, okay, well, you need to convert. And I think it's a year you have to convert. So Etsy, going back to the asterisk of Etsy at the very beginning with the Venn diagram. So Etsy was a B Corp. And then they went public, so they had an IPO, and they had this deadline where, if you wanted to continue to be certified as a B Corp with that pretty little logo, you have to convert by a benefit corporation, and you have, X amount of time, and the deadline was coming up, and everyone was kind of like, well, what's that going to do? Because there aren't very many public corporations that are benefit corporations. Are they going to do it? Are they going to not? And so they ended up not converting to a benefit corporation, and as a result, they lost their B Corp status. So that's why I had an asterisk next to them, because they're actually not a B Corp anymore, but they were probably the best example of a company that was a B Corp without being a benefit corporation. So here's just a little, and I'm almost to the end here. Here's just kind of like a little summary. This isn't 100% comprehensive, but I think this helps compare the two. So B Corp, you can do it anywhere, any state. Benefit corporation, your state has to have it. That this 30, this is a little outdated. I think it's up to 37 now. Accountability, this is kind of that fiduciary duty notion. You have to consider impact on all stakeholders, not just getting the most profit into the pockets of your shareholders. So that's the same for both. You got to do some form of report for both. That report will discuss your performance. That's similar in both. On a benefit corporation level, you usually have to do it every year, unless Delaware. On a B Corp side, you have to certify. Now it's every 3 years. And then the B Corp fees are probably a little bit more than the benefit corporation fees. So real quick, just some considerations, and then we'll get into some questions. I think either option is really great from a marketing or publicity standpoint, if that's what you want your company to be. If you're going for the conscious consumer who cares about the environment, or who cares about other causes, who isn't so concerned with things other than that, I think that is more and more the way of the world, the way of the future. So I think this can really help distinguish you, right? Again, it's going back to the example of just some flippant social media post about how so-and-so corporation cares about whatever it may be. Anyone can do that. Doing a benefit corporation or B Corp makes it a little more of a significant and enforceable commitment. The other side to that is, let's say you form as a benefit corporation or a B Corp, and then you end up thinking, this annual report is hard, or I don't want to pay these fees, or the people who want to invest with me don't want me to be that. I don't know how realistic that last one is, but the point is, if you stop reporting, because you have to do some sort of regular report via either benefit corporation or B Corp, people are going to know, right? Because there's not going to be that report out there. They're going to be like, they missed their report this year. And so I think there could be a little bit of blowback if you kind of started out as a benefit corporation or B Corp, and then all of a sudden you decided to drop that status. People could say, oh, well, maybe they didn't really mean it, or I don't have as much trust in this company anymore. So that's just something to think about. Legally, we went over it kind of quickly, but there are those super majority rights where now all of a sudden you need two-thirds of your shareholders to approve certain things, and you may have to pay out shareholders who disagree with any sort of big change in the company. You may have to pay them out in cash. That's those appraisal and dissenters' rights. So there is some downside there, but in theory, I think it creates a lot of benefit for people who run these companies, and it gives them protection to say, hey, you don't have to just consider profit. Again, I think that Ben and Jerry's example is a really good one. If you don't want to be in that situation, then it can help you to form as a benefit corporation. Time and resources, I think that's one thing to think about. Again, if you're a smaller company, that annual report that you have to create, that could get a little bit burdensome. Once you become, I don't know, maybe a 5 to 10 person company, probably not a big deal. And Patagonia's annual report, I think, was like 50 pages plus, but there are companies that are benefit corporations that have like an 8-page annual report. So it doesn't have to be this pretty glossy thing. But there is some additional time and resources you got to spend that could be deployed elsewhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. Oh, so I had a question. Why would a company like Etsy not want to incorporate into a benefit corporation from a B Corp? So Etsy was already like a regular C corporation, and they did an IPO. And at that point, they probably have, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of shareholders. And if they were going to convert into a B Corp, that would probably, or sorry, a benefit corporation, that would probably give rise to those appraisal rights, and they would probably need the 2/3 of stockholders to approve. And they might have decided, that might be difficult for us to get. Or number two, there may be a lot of people who just say, oh, I'd rather take a cash payout, which is not something that you can just get from a corporation normally as a stockholder. You can't just necessarily cash it in anytime. And so they may have just decided, the legal and all the other costs with it, it's just not worth it. Our business is doing fine. We already have a good reputation as far as we are concerned. We just don't want to deal with it. I don't know the exact reasons, but it may have been just something that they didn't really feel like they needed to do because they already kind of cemented their status in the world. The last consideration is just the unknown. So benefit corporations as a thing has only been around for 10 years, which is like a minuscule amount of time in the legal world, right? So like think about that fiduciary duty case I provided. That was from 1939. I mean, a lot of significant cases in the law world are many decades old. It takes a long time to get through the court system and to develop multiple lawsuits that tell you, hey, this is how a court is actually going to interpret what this law says about what a director of a benefit corporation can consider, right? I mean, where do you draw the line on, they were considering employee interests, but they're doing it too much. They needed to balance a little bit more profit in how they made a particular decision or how they decided to sell to that. I mean, we don't really know the answers to those questions yet. So just kind of beware that, this isn't a silver bullet that you'll never be sued for breach of fiduciary duty if you form as a benefit corporation. And none of this has really been tested in court. So I'm not saying that it's not going to work. We just don't know. I think there's like 3,000-ish B Corps, which really is not that many in California. In 2018, 0.05% of the for-profit companies formed were benefit corporations. So that is just such a tiny amount. So we just don't know exactly how all this is going to shake out. Okay, so I see some questions here, so let me get to them. As far as converting to a regular corporation in Delaware to a benefit corporation, that's not particularly hard. I mean, if you're using a lawyer, it may cost you, I don't know, you could probably do it for under $5,000. You could take a shot at it yourself too. There would be a little amendment you need to make to those articles of organization. I showed you that example of those for Patagonia with all the highlighting. There's going to be a nominal fee you'd have to pay to the state of Delaware, which off the top of my head, it's probably like $250 or less, something like that. And there may be an amendment you need to make to your bylaws. So if you just have a one-person company or 2 or 3-person company, probably not that difficult to convert from a C Corp to a benefit corp in Delaware. Another question, how specific do you need to be when identifying a beneficiary? Can it be simple as the environment? So that can depend on state law. And it would be different, especially because it's in Delaware. They're usually a little bit more lax. So I guess I'm a little surprised that they kick something back because they seem to be a little bit of the Wild West when it comes to the benefit corporation rules, at least as compared to the other states. So the short answer is I don't know. And I do think that it is a little bit vague. I don't think that there's, again, because there just haven't been that many benefit corporations filed. We don't have this huge chart of, hey, all these beneficiaries work, these ones don't. Here are real life examples. We just don't have a lot of data on that. So maybe that's something that you could get in touch with me after the presentation. I'd be happy to look into that a little bit further. But that's kind of a great example of kind of the risk in this area, right? Is that we have this benefit corporation concept in place, but there just hasn't been a lot of kind of test cases or guinea pigs or data to know, okay, where exactly is the line? How specific do we need to be on some of these things? So, I mean, that's just a great example. So
we got a few minutes left, Patrick. So if anybody has additional questions, there we go. So I'll let you answer that one. Any extra challenges of filing as a Delaware corporation from California?
So, not particularly. I mean, not any more than if you were, I think the idea is you're a company that's maybe based in California. That's where you live. That's where your operations are, at least at the beginning, but you want to file as a Delaware corporation, and that's totally fine. There's a couple of additional costs. Like Delaware requires you to have a physical address in Delaware. And there are tons of third-party services that will do that for you for a fee, for maybe a couple $100 a year. And if you are a Delaware corporation, but most of your operations are in California, you also have to file something extra with California because they want to make sure, hey, if you're generating profit in our state, we want to cut of any tax revenue. So there are a couple additional challenges, but we do for a normal corporation, we do that all the time. I wouldn't say it's prohibitive or that big of a deal at all. In your opinion, why would you want to file as a B Corp or benefit corporation versus a nonprofit? Yeah, so that's a really good question. So a benefit corporation is not the same as a nonprofit. And a nonprofit corporation, all the money that you take in as a nonprofit, you can pay people salaries, but you cannot distribute the profits to people beyond that, beyond actual business expenses. So when you dissolve or when you sell all the assets of a nonprofit, the nonprofit would get a bunch of money. You can't actually say, okay, cool, you own 20% of the nonprofit, so you get 20% of the profit. That's how it would work in a normal corporation, but that's not how it works in a nonprofit at all. So all the profits have to be provided actually to another similar, basically, charity. So if you want to actually be able to generate profit, sell the company for some money at some point, then that's why a benefit corporation makes more sense. You can still make a lot of money. It's kind of this weird hybrid between, well, we want to do good and not just focus on profit, but we also, the other side of it is, only doing good and not generating the profit. So that's probably why.
All right. Well, a couple minutes left. Maybe I've got a question here. So if you're starting out, you're thinking, I'm going to form a company. Would you want to start as a B Corp, benefit corp, a nonprofit, a C Corp? Like what are sort of the considerations?
So I think I would probably start out as a benefit corporation because I think if you can comply with those requirements, I think the annual report for a benefit corporation is less stringent and less time intensive than it would be to go through that B impact assessment that B Labs does. So I think in some ways it makes sense to just start as a benefit corporation. And then if you like it, you can go the next step and say, okay, I want to seek B Corp certification. There's plenty of people who do it the opposite way. But the other advantage to doing it the way that I just discussed is you don't have to worry about, oh, now I need to convert, my deadline's coming up to do it. So I think in a lot of ways it makes sense to just start out as a benefit corporation before you proceed to B Corp. Which state is best for benefit corporation? I think from the founder's perspective, probably Delaware, because their requirements are just a little bit more lax. Now, maybe that doesn't square with what you want to do. Maybe you want to make a point to say, I'm going to the state that has the strictest requirements so I can let everybody know that I am so accountable and transparent and very committed to this cause. Maybe that's part of your overall strategy, and that may very well be a good one. But I think in some ways it makes sense to start out where the requirements are a little bit lower, and it is Delaware, which is a common place to incorporate anyway. So I don't think it looks like you've sought out this weird state just so you can have the easiest requirements, because a lot of people incorporate in Delaware. Most people incorporate in Delaware.
All right. Well, we've hit the 1 hour mark. Before we sign off, Patrick, if people have questions, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think I've got my info here. Hopefully you can see it in the bottom left-hand corner, patrick.klingborg@pillsburylaw.com. There's my phone number too. You can look me up on the Pillsbury website. Again, happy to discuss any other questions you may have. Thanks again for attending. Please stay safe. Check out the UCSD extension programs. Nathan, anything I missed?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for the plug. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, and hope you got a lot out of this. Thanks for the questions. Like I said at the beginning, we did record this, so we will hopefully very soon post this onto Extension's website, our YouTube channel, and I can send a notification out once that video is up. Might take a week, not really sure just yet. So that's it. Thanks everybody, and feel free to check out upcoming sessions on the Small Business Management webpage.